So you've been diagnosed with ADHD as an adult. Now what? Do you feel adrift in a sea with very few answers? Do you feel like there's so much you don't know and don't know where to start? Well, the bad news is I felt the same way when I was diagnosed at the age of 26, which is now 7 years ago. We won't talk about that. But the good news is that I've made you the ADHD Starter Kit that I wish I had had. And with the rates of ADHD diagnosis on the rise across the world, you are not alone. A 2023 US survey found that approximately 15.5 million Americans currently have an ADHD diagnosis, and over half of them were diagnosed in adulthood, not in childhood. We're seeing the same story in the UK too. Since the pandemic, ADHD prescriptions have increased by about 18% each year, with the prescription rates jumping from 25 to over 41 per 1,000 people between 2019, 2020 and 2023, 2024. This ADHD Starter Kit will cover medication, diet, exercise, genetics, and co-occurring conditions, reasonable workplace accommodations, and more. Feel free to use the timestamps below to jump forward to whatever you're interested in, in case you have a hyperfocus or lose interest. And I get it. I totally get it. I will also be referring to a lot of research which will appear on the screen with full references provided in the video description if you want to learn more and check any of it out for yourself. At times, I will also add stories about my personal experience just in case it could help anyone. Fingers crossed. Also, please note that I am not a medical professional, just someone who wants to help and could have personally used all of this information a lot earlier. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's start at the very beginning. What ADHD actually is. Most people think ADHD just means hyperactive kids who can't sit still. Me. But anyway, ADHD, which is Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder, is a neurodevelopmental condition that lasts your entire life. It affects attention, executive function, impulse control, emotional regulation, and motivation. There are 3 official presentations. Predominantly inattentive, this means you're easily distracted, forgetful, you lose things, you have difficulty finishing tasks. This is often described as daydreamy as well. Predominantly hyperactive, that's me. This is impulsivity, restlessness, interrupting, difficulty waiting, constant movement or talking. Can you tell? There is also the combined presentation, which is a mix of both inattentive as well as hyperactive, and this is the most common. It's worth noting that there is a lot of newer and emerging research on ADHD presentations, which is very exciting, but for now, let's keep it to the DSM-5, though I really hope a lot of it is updated in the DSM-6 whenever that actually finally happens. Under the current diagnostic criteria, women and AFAB, which is assigned female at birth, people are far more likely to present as inattentive, which means they often go undiagnosed because society sees quiet and spaced out and daydreamy as less disruptive than bouncing off the walls, which is typically hyperactive. This gender bias is one of the reasons many women don't get diagnosed until adulthood. So if you're one of the many that has been diagnosed as an adult, I want to tell you that whatever you're feeling right now is valid. There is no one correct way to respond to your ADHD diagnosis. You might feel relief because you finally have an explanation. You might feel grief because you wonder how your life could have been if someone had noticed earlier. You might feel anger because you slipped through the cracks. You might feel hopeful and excited because now you finally have answers. Maybe you just feel numb. It is a lot to process. Or you could be like me and feel very little because being diagnosed didn't rock your world or affect your sense of self-worth on a deeper level. All of these reactions are valid, and research also shows that late diagnosed adults often experience a mix of positive and negative emotions as they reevaluate their past through this new lens. It can be hard not to slip into what ifs as well. What if I'd been diagnosed sooner? What if I'd been medicated earlier? What if I'd had better coping strategies from a younger age? Would I be happier, further in life, more fulfilled? I want you to know that it is perfectly normal and okay to have these thoughts. Just do what you can to not fixate on them and focus on the future where you can. It is never too late to be diagnosed, and I encourage anyone who feels that they might have ADHD to approach a diagnosis in their own time. ADHD and Genetics. ADHD isn't caused by bad parenting or too much sugar, though the internet might try to tell you otherwise. It's actually one of the most genetically heritable conditions that we know of. Studies estimate that around 70 to 80% of the variants in who develops ADHD can be explained by genetics. In the study of Genetics of Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, twin and family studies consistently support the role of genetic influences, with heritability estimates for ADHD being around 76%. That's a lot. So if you've been diagnosed, it's probably worth looking around your family tree. Parents, siblings, even kids, the chances are that you'll see similar patterns. ADHD doesn't just pop up randomly, it runs in families like curly hair, bad knees, and high cholesterol. And this isn't just from one paper. A review in the Lancet Psychiatry called ADHD one of the most heritable psychiatric disorders, comparing its genetic basis to things like autism and schizophrenia. Which leads me to my next section, ADHD and co-occurring conditions. Genetics doesn't just influence ADHD itself, it also overlaps with a lot of other conditions. That's why most people with ADHD don't just have ADHD. Here are some examples of conditions that have high rates of co-occurrence with people with ADHD versus those without. This is also not an exhaustive list, there's a lot more than this, but I think it's a good place to start. Anxiety and depression. Up to 50% of adults with ADHD will experience an anxiety disorder, and 30 to 40% will experience major depression at some point as well. Substance use disorders. ADHD is linked to a significantly higher risk of developing alcohol or drug dependency, partly due to impulsivity and self-medication. Sleep disorders. Chronic insomnia, restless legs, circadian rhythm issues. ADHD brains just don't do sleep like neurotypical ones do, and I struggle with this. There's also hormonal conditions. PCOS and PMDD show elevated comorbidity with ADHD, likely due to overlapping mechanisms involving dopamine and hormonal regulation. Connective tissue disorders. Researchers found links between ADHD and hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, also known as HEDS, with one large cohort study reporting ADHD rates as high as 20% in patients with HEDS, which is almost 10 times higher than the general population. Eating disorders. People with ADHD, particularly women and AFAB folks, have a much higher rate of having an eating disorder. A large Swedish cohort study found that ADHD increases the risk of bulimia nervosa by almost 4 times and anorexia by 2 times. Binge eating disorder is also strongly associated with impulsivity and emotional dysregulation acting as major risk factors. And this is something that I can speak to myself because it is something I've struggled with for a long time. I have recently passed my 10-year mark, woohoo, a decade of being in recovery from an eating disorder. Before I was diagnosed with ADHD, I would definitely swing wildly between binge eating and anorexia, and it definitely put my life at risk. And people don't talk about the lived experience and the very real risk of eating disorders anywhere near enough because it is extremely dangerous. Anorexia specifically has the highest risk of mortality of any mental health condition. It's really dangerous. And if you go between binge eating and anorexia, so many different things can happen. And it ended up with me getting a bit emotional. Wow. I had a heart attack because of anorexia, and that was a very sobering moment for me, and I had to go into recovery. And then when I finally got diagnosed with ADHD a few years after I had been largely recovered, it explained a lot about my coping mechanisms and why that had happened to me. So it is a lot more common than you think it is. Please look after yourselves, and if you have any issues with disordered eating, whether that is binge eating, bulimia, or anorexia, please seek help, because I promise you that there is help out there and it does get better. And it got better for me. The diagnosis helped, but I'd already entered recovery before that point. Wow, I love being vulnerable on Maine. Anyway, that's my personal aside. Moving on. And then there's autism. ADHD and autism don't just sometimes co-occur, they share genetic roots. A massive register-based study in Sweden found that having ADHD in the family significantly increased the likeliness of autism and vice versa. The overlap exists because both conditions involve common genetic variants that affect brain development, dopamine regulation, and executive functioning. Clinically, this shows up as a lot of ADHD people, and ADHD is ADHD and autism combined. And while the DSM technically lists ADHD and autism as separate, in practice the two often blur together. That's why it's so common for people to get diagnosed with ADHD first and then later discover that they're autistic, or the other way around. Quick little aside talking about autism, because I know that you don't always like making eye contact, and I'm making so much beautiful eye contact with you because it's the illusion of intimacy without any of the social anxiety. Shout out to Elgato for sending me this amazing teleprompter that has made this much easier, because if you look at my first video essay, there's a lot of this going on. It's not cute. It's not sexy. We don't stan. But this piece of tech is very sexy and means that I can look at you and you can look at me and we can just sit here and look at each other Isn't it nice? Isn't it comfy? So thank you, Elgato, for this amazing piece of tech. This teleprompter is tits, and I can't recommend it more highly if you want to up your content game. I heard that it's also good for streaming, and you can have a whole bunch of stuff where the chat is on there and then you're actually streaming at the same time. And I don't stream anymore, but in terms of just filming video content, this is amazing. Anyway, back to the video. One of the first things that may happen after an ADHD diagnosis is gaining access to specific medication. Stimulants such as Ritalin, Concerta, Adderall, dexamphetamine, and Vyvanse remain the gold standard. They've consistently been shown to reduce ADHD's core symptoms, inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, in around 70 to 80% of people. But it's not just about focus. Research now shows stimulants can actually normalize certain patterns of brain activity. One meta-analysis put it like this: long-term stimulant treatment is associated with improvements in brain structure and function towards typical levels. In other words, meds don't just mask ADHD, they help the brain work more like it's supposed to. There's also a really annoying myth that ADHD meds cause substance abuse. In reality, it is the opposite. A Swedish registry study of over 38,000 people found that those on medication had a 31% lower rate of substance abuse compared to those untreated. So stimulants don't fuel addiction, they actually protect against it. Non-stimulants are equally important, especially for people who can't take stimulants due to heart conditions, anxiety sensitivity, or side effects. Strattera, guanfacine, and clonidine all have strong evidence backing their use. A massive network meta-analysis across children, adolescents, and adults concluded atomoxetine, extended-release guanfacine, and clonidine are effective and well-tolerated alternatives. They may not kick in as fast as stimulants, but for many people, they are still life-changing, especially those with high anxiety or sleep issues, where non-stimulants can actually be a better match. Though taking ADHD meds can sometimes be frowned upon or stigmatized in pockets of wider society, they are not a crutch. In fact, medication for ADHD is one of the most well-studied interventions in all of psychiatry. ADHD meds work to improve focus, lower risk-taking, reduce accidents, and even protect against substance misuse. For many of us, they can feel like finally getting glasses for our brain. However, meds won't fix everything. They can certainly help, but they are not a cure-all. We still need to do our best to find coping strategies that work for us and in our own lives. This is deeply individual, and these look different person to person, but it's when we can combine medication with robust coping strategies that we get the best results from both. Speaking of your meds working as effectively as possible, what not to take with your ADHD meds? Something that no one told me after I was diagnosed and started medication is that certain things can affect the efficacy of your meds. Yeah, it's fun, right? So I'm going to tell you what I wish someone had told me years earlier. Caffeine and stimulants don't play well together. I know we love caffeine. I know, I love caffeine. But while a cup of coffee on top of your Vyvanse or Ritalin might sound harmless, it can actually push your nervous system into overdrive, leading to jitteriness, anxiety, and sleep problems. And we already have enough of a problem with sleep problems. One review put it bluntly: the combination of stimulant medication with caffeine can result in additive cardiovascular and sleep-related adverse effects. And extra heart issues when you're already taking stimulant medication? It's a recipe for disaster, babe. Don't do it. Antidepressants can be tricky. Some are safe to combine under medical supervision, but others can be dangerous. SSRIs, MAOIs, and bupropion in particular can either reduce stimulant effectiveness or cause dangerous interactions. In rare cases, this can trigger serotonin syndrome, a potentially life-threatening condition. A pharmacological review on adult ADHD treatment warned clinicians must carefully consider drug-on-drug interactions, particularly with antidepressants. That being said, while they can have adverse effects, this doesn't mean that they will always have adverse effects. Make sure you discuss medication interactions with your doctor to ensure you stay safe and that your treatment remains effective. Vitamin C and acidic foods can sabotage absorption. Yep, your morning orange juice could actually be making your meds less effective. Acidic foods like citrus or tomato, vitamin C supplements, and even soda can reduce the effectiveness of your stimulant medication. A study by Patrick and Markovitz notes that absorption decreases in acidic environments. So the takeaway is, be careful with antidepressant combos and maybe don't chase your pill with coffee or orange juice. In fact, try to have your latte or your fresh squeeze at least 40 minutes before or after you take your ADHD medication. But meds aren't everything, so let's also talk about lifestyle supports. Meds might be wonderful, but they are just one tool, and ideally we would like to make use of the whole toolbox. And yes, I'm about to tell you all the things we roll our eyes at and don't want to hear by recommending the boring and basic stuff, because research shows that lifestyle and behavioral strategies can make a huge difference. My parents used to tell me, "Oh, Ella, why don't you just take a walk or drink some water, get some exercise, you'll feel better." And little Ella was like,
"Oh, whatever, how is drinking some water going to help with my depression?"
And while it didn't cure my existential dread, it helped. And as an adult, I've come to learn that yes, it does make a difference. And now I have to give that same advice to others. And I have become what I once hated. Love that for me. Moving on, let's actually talk about some of those things. The first one being sleep hygiene. ADHD brains are prone to delayed sleep cycles. Studies show up to 73% of adults with ADHD experience chronic sleep problems. Keeping a consistent bedtime, limiting blue light, and sometimes melatonin can help reset the system. I personally use blackout blinds and an eye mask, but I won't lie, sleep is very hard for me. It's very hard because I love a bit of revenge bedtime procrastination. So to be honest, I could use your tips on this one. The next one is exercise. Aerobic exercise literally boosts dopamine and norepinephrine, the same neurotransmitters that stimulants target. In one study, a single session of moderate exercise improved ADHD symptoms in both kids and adults. And this is one that I feel very strongly about because it works for me very well. My mind is clearer and I have less issues with emotional regulation when I exercise frequently. My best advice is to find a form of exercise you enjoy and stick to it. For some people, this is team sports. Others prefer solo activities like hikes or going to the gym. Just find what works for you and do your best to incorporate it when you can. And if anyone else is like me and enjoys picking up and putting down heavy things, let me know what your best lift is in the comments because I would like to nerd out about it. Thank you. And exercise naturally leads me to diet. There's no miracle ADHD diet, but stabilizing blood sugar matters. High protein meals and reducing ultra-processed sugars have been shown to reduce hyperactivity and improve focus. It can also be hard to remember to eat when you take stimulant medication. So if this is something you struggle with, I actually found that setting regular alarms helped a lot. These alarms reminded me to eat. And even if I only had a small meal or a small snack, it helped a lot throughout the day and meant I didn't crash as hard in the evening when my medication inevitably wore off. Then there's therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT, can be tailored for ADHD and teach real-world skills, breaking tasks into steps, managing rejection sensitivity, and dealing with time blindness. A randomized controlled trial showed CBT significantly improved functioning in adults with ADHD compared to just taking meds alone. However, not everyone finds that CBT works for them. There are a number of therapies that can be effective for different people, and I personally found that schema therapy was the most useful for my personal trauma and circumstances, so it's best to shop around and see what works best for you. Then, of course, there's external scaffolding. Tools like planners, reminders, body doubling, and apps aren't cheats. They're a combination that make ADHD brains thrive. Barkley described them as prosthetic devices for executive function. The real key is building symptoms that fit your brain, not punishing yourself for not fitting neurotypical molds. Not everyone thrives with a planner, so experiment once again until you start finding strategies that help with you and help you thrive. I highly recommend body doubling, by the way. It works wonders for me when I get paralyzed by the overwhelm of life in general, especially life admin. Hate life admin. Career and workplace accommodations. ADHD doesn't disappear at the office door. Deadlines, emails, multitasking, noisy environments, all of it can hit harder when you have ADHD. But accommodations are not special treatment. They're what allow ADHD employees to show their best work. The ADA National Network recommends simple, practical adjustments, flexible schedules, written instructions, noise-cancelling headphones, and task management software. These changes cost little, but can completely transform productivity. Research also shows that when accommodations are provided, employees with ADHD are more engaged and less likely to leave jobs. Barkley sums it up. ADHD is not a disorder of knowing what to do, but of doing what you know. External support reduces that gap. However, not all careers and workplaces will be open to accommodations, and some industries will be more flexible than others. Someone working on a construction site is going to have very different needs and accommodations and different experiences than someone working in an office or someone working in the arts. I am personally very fortunate to work from home for a company that is extremely accommodating of my needs. For me, this looks like flexi hours, autonomy, and support when I need it. I asked for these and my work was happy to give them to me. That being said, a lot of people don't even know what to ask for or where to start. So here are some examples of workplace accommodations that may or may not be possible for you. Environment and focus. These can look like noise-cancelling headphones or access to a quiet workspace, permission to use white noise machines or focus apps, and flexible seating, sitting away from distractions, high traffic areas, or open offices. Scheduling and deadlines. Flexible start and end times, especially for those that have sleep cycle issues. That's me. I start late. Thanks, work. Extended deadlines where possible, or breaking big projects into smaller deadlines. And extra time or training for learning new tasks. Communication and instructions. Written instructions or task lists in addition to verbal instructions. Regular check-ins with a manager to prioritize tasks. And visual aids, flowcharts or project management tools such as Trello, Asana, Notion, Jira is my favorite, etc. Task management. Permission to use planners, calendars, reminder apps or alarms at work. Task batching. Grouping similar tasks together to minimize context switching, and delegating clerical or repetitive tasks if they're not essential to the role. Breaks and energy regulation. Short and more frequent breaks instead of one long lunch. Movement breaks. Standing, stretching, or walking during long tasks. I wish I could do that now. Anyway, access to fidget tools, standing desks, or exercise balls if it helps regulate focus. Then, of course, remote and hybrid options, which I personally benefit from. Working from home can offer flexibility where tasks allow. Hybrid schedules also balance social energy and focus time, and regular feedback instead of annual reviews. This keeps progress visible and avoids surprises. Masking and unmasking, and why it's so draining. Unmasking is a hard one to talk about, but I do think it's important, as many adults spend years masking, e.g., copying acceptable behaviour, over-preparing, apologising for needs, etc. Because of how long many of us mask for, especially the later in life we get an ADHD diagnosis, unmasking can feel scary, complicated, and raw. Camouflaging and masking is well documented in neurodevelopmental conditions. It improves social acceptability short-term, but is linked with stress and mental health strain long-term. ADHD-specific masking literature is emerging and echoes similar patterns. Unmasking can also cost relationships. When you stop over-functioning to meet others' expectations, some people struggle with the change. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. It means dynamics are shifting. And when you've just been diagnosed with ADHD and need support the most, unmasking and potentially losing relationships is hard and destabilizing. Sometimes the people you rely on won't be there. This isn't always true, but I want to prepare you for the worst case scenario. I mention it because it did happen to me, not in a huge way, but I did lose some close friends after being diagnosed, and while unmasking wasn't the sole reason, it certainly didn't help. I wish I had good news, but sometimes this is just the way the world works. Look after yourself and prioritize the people that show you love and support regardless of your ADHD diagnosis. Those people are worth their weight in gold, and you should keep them around. So why did I make this video? I made it because I really could have used an ADHD starter kit when I was diagnosed at 26, as I mentioned earlier. First off, my father was diagnosed in his early 50s, and then he found out about the fact that it is largely genetic and told me to pursue a diagnosis of my own. And surprise, surprise, it's really not a surprise. It came back positive and I have ADHD. And I felt adrift. I felt lost. I really needed a lot more information and support than I was offered at the time. So I wanted to make this for you all to hopefully help you navigate this new and scary world, especially because there's so much more of us than there was before, and ADHD rates of diagnosis are on the rise. I hope that this can help any of you. I hope that some of this is useful, and I would love it if you could share any advice you have for others in the comments. That way we can all help and support each other more, and the more the better. ADHD isn't a verdict, it's a manual. You deserve support that fits your brain. Start small, measure what matters, and keep the bits that work. And please remember, you are not alone. There's a lot of us in this together. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, please like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with anyone you think needs to hear it. I'd love to make more, and being able to turn on that sweet, sweet AdSense would go a long way. This has been Ella, your resident ADHD person. You are all so welcome. Bye. Oh my God, stripes!
Good timing!
Oh my God, relatable. I always want attention too. Who would have thought? Also, apparently there's research that shows that dogs can have ADHD. The more you know, you definitely have it. You definitely have it. Do we both have it? Probably a little bit. Just put that at the end.
Yep, great. Sip of wine.